I found out I had been erased from the family conversation the same way most men my age discover the truth, by accident. My daughter had left her phone on the counter during Sunday dinner, screen still lit, messages streaming in a group chat called Next Steps. My name wasn't there. Not once. They were planning my future in a thread I was never meant to see. One line burned into me like a hot nail. He's too attached to that house. We'll need to handle it for him. That's how the evening began. Not with prayer or pie or stories of my grandkids. It began with a quiet betrayal typed in blue bubbles and green check marks. If you've ever felt left out of your own family's plans, you'll understand why I kept reading. Before I take you further, I want to pause here. If this story resonates with you, even a little, please tap like, subscribe, or share a comment below. It may seem small, but it lets me know these stories matter to someone besides me. The house in question wasn't some sprawling mansion or gated estate. It was a two-story craftsman on a corner lot in Dayton, Ohio. Nothing glamorous. Just wood I'd stained myself, windows I'd repaired through Midwest winters, a porch where my late wife and I had rocked in silence when the days felt too long. I had built my business brick by brick, literally. 35 years as a contractor, pouring foundations in snow, patching roofs under July heat, carrying the ache in my shoulders like a permanent badge. The house was the one project I never sold, never left behind. It was mine because it was ours. And yet, as I scrolled through those messages, I realized my children had redrawn the blueprints of my life without even asking me. At first, I told myself I had misread. Maybe they were talking about refinancing or about cleaning the gutters, but the words kept coming: estate agent, paperwork, retirement facility. They weren't planning to help me, they were planning to move me. I felt my pulse slow, then quicken again like a faulty pump. My fork clinked against the plate. The conversation around me hummed on, my son-in-law telling a story about traffic, my grandchildren laughing at a silly video, but none of it reached me. The betrayal wasn't loud. It was whispered through keystrokes, hiding in plain sight, while I sat a few feet away. Later that night, when the dishes were stacked and the kids had gone upstairs, I pretended to nap in my chair. Instead, I pulled out my own phone. I knew the family had created a smaller group chat months back. For scheduling, they said. Turns out they hadn't just scheduled vacations, they had scheduled me out of my own home. I stared at the list of members, my 3 children, their spouses, not me. But here's the part they didn't know: because of a quirk in settings, the account was still linked to my email. Quietly, without a sound, I had been there all along, watching, reading, waiting. The first rush was grief. It's a peculiar grief, being alive while your family speaks as though you are already gone. But then came something else steadier: resolve. My late wife, Ellen, used to tell me that patience was my strongest tool. Measure twice, cut once, she'd say about our life together, not just the wood. She believed in planning, in letting a storm pass before you fixed the roof. Tonight her voice returned, not in comfort but in instruction. I decided not to confront them. Not yet. Instead, I would listen, take notes, learn the shape of their plan the way I once studied blueprints, and when the time came, I would choose whether to build or to tear down. The twist, though, came faster than I expected. 2 days later, while I was sipping lukewarm coffee in the kitchen, a new message buzzed across the screen. Let's meet the realtor this week. Dad doesn't need to know. They didn't realize that every keystroke echoed in my pocket. The house they wanted to sell without me was the same house that held Ellen's laugh, my sweat, their first Christmas mornings, and I would not let it slip away like a misplaced tool. That night I printed the chat log. Page after page rolled from the printer, a paper trail of quiet betrayal. I stacked them neatly in a folder. For now, I said nothing. But inside, a line had been drawn. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was the hidden witness to their scheme, the silent admin of a family I thought was mine. And they had no idea. I used to think the hardest part of growing older was the body. The knees that protested every staircase, the eyesight that blurred fine print, the way a morning stretch felt more like an ordeal than a ritual. But after that week, I realized the hardest part wasn't physical at all. It was being spoken about as though you were already gone. That Monday morning, I made my coffee the same way I always had, 2 sugars, no cream, and opened the group chat I wasn't supposed to see. New messages waited. The first line made my stomach turn. If we wait too long, the market will cool. We need to list the house soon. There it was, not a suggestion, not a question. A decision, typed casually between emojis and abbreviations. My son, Daniel, had always been efficient, the sort who reduced problems to bullet points and action steps. Now I was the problem, and the action step was removing me. Scrolling further, I caught a draft of something more formal, a scanned document, grainy but legible. A deed transfer. My daughter-in-law had uploaded it, maybe by mistake, maybe with pride. My name, the same one carved into high school trophies and paychecks and utility bills for half a century, was there at the top. And then beneath it, in bold letters, transfer of ownership. They were preparing paperwork as though the house were already theirs to bargain with. I pushed the mug aside. The coffee had gone cold, but it wasn't the drink that left a bitter taste. It was the realization that somewhere along the line, I had become less a father and more a piece of property management. I closed my eyes and tried to summon Ellen's voice, the way I had in chapter 1 of this story. She would have said something wise, something calming. Measure twice, cut once. But all I could hear now was silence. I opened the chat again. More lines appeared. He's too stubborn to agree, but if we all push together, he won't have a choice. Retirement facilities are better these days. He'll make friends, he'll adjust. Adjust, as though I were a couch being moved from one living room to another. By afternoon, my phone buzzed with a call from Daniel. His voice carried that bright, forced cheerfulness children use when they're about to ask for something. "Hey Dad, just checking in. How's the week treating you?" I knew better. His words were casual, but his tone was tense, as though testing the waters before wading deeper. "I'm fine," I told him. I kept my voice steady, neutral, almost bored. If I sounded too alert, he might sense I already knew. He spoke about traffic, about the kids' soccer games, about a new project at work. Not once did he mention the house, but I heard it in the pauses, in the way his sentences trailed off, in the faint rustle of paper near his phone. He was rehearsing, setting the stage. When we hung up, I felt no comfort, only confirmation. The betrayal wasn't hypothetical. It was active, present, ongoing. That night after dinner, I sat in my study. The same study where I had drawn up contracts for clients decades ago, where I had balanced checkbooks late into the night, where Ellen once read me passages from her favorite novels. The desk lamp glowed across a mess of papers, bills, notes, the beginnings of letters I never finished. I reached for a manila folder and began slipping inside the printed chat logs from the night before. Then I added screenshots from the new messages. Then the deed draft. Piece by piece, a record was forming. I wasn't sure yet what I would do with it, but I knew enough from years of construction work and business negotiations. You don't start a fight empty-handed. The following morning, the chat grew louder, plans solidified. My eldest, Sarah, wrote, "Let's meet with the realtor on Thursday. Dad won't have to be there." Her husband replied, "We'll handle the paperwork. It'll be easier if he just signs at the end." At the end, as if I were an afterthought, a rubber stamp. That's when I made a decision, not to confront, not yet, but to prepare. I opened my bottom drawer and pulled out a small silver USB drive. It had been a stocking stuffer from years ago when the kids thought it funny to give me tech toys I'd never use. Irony has a way of aging well. I transferred every file, every screenshot, every whisper of their scheme into that little device. When the transfer bar reached 100%, I felt something inside me click into place. It wasn't rage. Not yet. It was something calmer, like a craftsman tightening the last screw on a beam, knowing the structure would hold when the storm came. By evening, I had an appointment set with an old friend, my attorney. We hadn't spoken in months, but when he heard my voice, he said, "Come in tomorrow morning." As I closed the call, I glanced at the chat again. More jokes, more plans, more dismissal. They thought they were building a future without me. What they didn't realize was that I had been in the room all along. Not the father fading into irrelevance, but the witness, the recorder, the silent architect of the turn yet to come. When I turned off the lamp that night, the house seemed to breathe differently. The floorboards creaked, the furnace hummed, the pipes clanged faintly. It was alive with memory, with history, with every ounce of work Ellen and I had poured into it. And I knew this. I wasn't about to let a group chat decide its fate. I arrived at Marcus Hall's office just after 9, the USB drive heavy in my pocket. The building hadn't changed in years, same brick exterior, same brass nameplate near the door, but stepping inside felt different this time. I wasn't here about a roof permit or a business contract. I was here about my own children. Marcus greeted me with that calm, steady handshake of his. We'd known each other for decades. He'd helped me incorporate my contracting business when I was 32 and barely making rent. He drafted wills, reviewed insurance claims, even mediated a dispute with a stubborn neighbor once, but never had I walked in carrying the weight I carried now. "Fred," he said, motioning toward his leather chairs, "you look tired." I sat, exhaling slowly. "I've seen better weeks." I slid the USB across his polished desk. "Everything you need is on there, messages, screenshots, even a draft deed." He raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions right away. He inserted the drive into his computer, scanning the files with practiced speed. His expression shifted gradually from curiosity to concern to something close to anger. When he finally leaned back, his voice was measured. "Fred, this isn't just family drama. This is coordinated. They're preparing documents to move your property without your consent." Hearing it out loud, from a man who had read more contracts than I'd built houses, made my stomach tighten. "What does it mean legally?" I asked. Marcus folded his hands. "You still hold title, that's clear, but the danger is psychological pressure. If they corner you, push you to sign while you're vulnerable, it could become binding. I've seen it happen." I thought of Daniel's call, Sarah's messages, the cheerful voices masking sharp intentions. Psychological pressure, yes, that was the weapon. Not fists, not threats, just a steady erosion of my will. And if I refuse, I pressed. "They may escalate," Marcus said. "Try to paint you as unfit. Suggest you can't manage finances, can't live alone. Courts listen when multiple family members speak in unison. That's the risk." His words landed like hammer blows. For a moment, I pictured myself shuffled into a retirement facility, stripped of my house, reduced to Sunday visits scheduled between soccer games. The thought chilled me more than any December wind. I stared at the oak shelves behind Marcus, lined with law books and framed certificates. They reminded me of my workshop walls, tools hung with care, each one ready for its task. Marcus had his tools, I had mine, and right now his were the ones I needed. "What should I do?" I asked quietly. He leaned forward. "First, do nothing rash, no confrontations yet. Let them think you're unaware. That buys us time. Second, strengthen your documentation. Keep receipts, tax statements, maintenance logs, anything proving you've actively managed the property. If they argue you're incapable, we'll show the opposite." I nodded. It made sense. Build the foundation before the walls. "Third," he continued, "consider protective structures. A living trust perhaps, or transferring the deed into an entity you control. It creates barriers they can't easily breach." That word, barriers, resonated. I had spent my life building walls, fences, roofs, always to protect, to keep out rain, wind, intruders. Now the intruders bore my last name. "Will it take long?" I asked. Marcus tapped his pen. "Basic protections a few days, more complex ones weeks, but you should know once you act they'll know. The moment they realize the house is locked behind legal armor, the conflict will surface." I left his office with a folder of notes and a strange calmness. Not peace exactly, but clarity. I had work to do and I knew the steps. Walking to my truck, I passed the city square where a fountain trickled steadily. The water had worn grooves into the stone over decades. That's how betrayal felt, slow, steady, carving away until one day you realize the shape has changed completely. As I drove home, I thought about Ellen again. She would have hated all this. She'd have told me to forgive, to gather everyone around the table to talk it through. But Ellen had also known me better than anyone. She would have seen the determination in my jaw, the way I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. She would have known I wasn't going to let this one pass. That evening, the chat buzzed again. I sat in my study, folder of legal notes beside me, and watched as my children's words scrolled across the screen. Thursday, 3 o'clock with the realtor. Dad doesn't need to know until it's done. We'll make it easier on him that way. Easier. They thought they were sparing me. I looked around the room, at the framed photographs, the shelves of old contracts, the chair Ellen once used when she proofread my invoices. This wasn't just a room. It was evidence. It was memory. It was mine. As the sun set, painting long shadows across the floor, I realized something important. I wasn't just holding on to a house. I was holding on to a story. The story of every nail driven, every bill paid, every Christmas morning. And if they wanted to erase me from their group chat, from their plans, from their version of the future, well, they had forgotten one thing. I was still the builder here, and builders know how to reinforce what matters most. That night, before turning in, I placed the USB and Marcus's notes into a lockbox beneath my bed. My children might have believed they were orchestrating a quiet transition, but I had begun drafting a blueprint of my own. The storm was gathering, and for the first time in years, I was ready to meet it. Thursday evening arrived with a forced cheer I could sense even before I stepped into my daughter Sarah's house. The table had been set with care, candles glowing, napkins folded neatly, a roast filling the air with herbs and garlic. To anyone else, it might have looked like a family gathering. To me, it looked like a stage. They wanted me comfortable. They wanted me pliable. And most of all, they wanted me unaware. Daniel greeted me at the door with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Dad, you made it. Traffic okay?" His hand clapped my shoulder a second too long, like he was steadying me, testing my balance. The grandkids darted around, chasing one another, laughter echoing through the hall. I bent to hug them, inhaling the scent of crayons and peanut butter, grateful for innocence untainted by schemes. They had no idea the adults in the room were rehearsing lines for a play I hadn't been invited to join. At the table, the chatter flowed too smoothly. Sarah passed the bread basket with exaggerated warmth. "Dad, we were just saying how good it is to all be together." Her husband chimed in, "Family's everything, right?" Knives scraped plates. Glasses clinked. Beneath it all, there was a rhythm, a current tugging at me. Every compliment, every laugh, carried the weight of a hidden agenda. I chewed, nodded, offered polite answers, but I was listening between the lines. Halfway through the meal, the shift came. Daniel leaned back in his chair, casual but deliberate. "You've been keeping busy at the house, Dad. Must be a lot all by yourself." I looked at him over my fork. "It keeps me occupied." He nodded, sympathetic, too sympathetic. "You've worked hard all your life, maybe too hard. You deserve to rest, you know. Not worry about maintenance bills, all that." The others exchanged glances, subtle as a passing breeze. They thought they were invisible, but I'd spent years reading clients, subcontractors, city inspectors. I knew when words carried hidden costs. Sarah reached for her glass of wine. "He's right. You should be enjoying yourself more. Travel, maybe. Let us take some of the burden off your shoulders." There it was, the first real nail tapped into place. I swallowed, setting my fork down with care. "The house isn't a burden, it's my home." Her smile faltered but returned quickly, polished. "Of course, Dad. No one's saying otherwise. We just worry. It's a lot for one person. And the market's so strong right now. It would be smart to take advantage while prices are high." The table went still. Even the children seemed to quiet, as if sensing the air had thickened. I let the silence stretch, long enough for them to wonder what I might say. Inside, my heart pounded like a drum, but outwardly I kept my voice steady. "I'll think about it." Relief flashed across their faces, relief so bright it might as well have been neon. They believed they'd made progress, nudged me a step closer to surrender. Only I knew the truth. I wasn't conceding. I was measuring, recording. adding another layer to the foundation of the case Marcus and I were quietly building. The meal continued, lighter now, their laughter a touch too loud, their praise a shade too sweet. My son-in-law raised his glass in a toast to Dad for always being there for us. The irony was sharp enough to cut. I sipped my wine, eyes drifting to the faces around me. These were my children, the ones I'd carried on my shoulders, taught to ride bikes, held through fevered nights. And here they sat, strategizing beneath the guise of love, mistaking my patience for weakness. I thought of Ellen again, how she'd have squeezed my hand under the table, reminding me to stay calm, to see the long game. I missed that steady pressure, that anchor. But in its absence I found something else, resolve hardening like concrete. Later, as dessert was served, apple pie, my favorite, I noticed Sarah watching me closely. "Do you like it, Dad?" "It's good," I said, though the sweetness barely registered. What I wanted was not pie but truth, and truth was already sitting quietly in my pocket in the form of a USB drive and a folder of printed chats. I dabbed my lips with a napkin, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "Thank you for dinner, I appreciate it." They smiled, satisfied. They thought the evening had gone exactly as planned, but so did I. Because sometimes the best move in a game isn't striking back. It's letting your opponent believe they are winning, right up until the moment the ground shifts beneath them. The night after that dinner, I sat in my study long after the dishes had been washed and the candles at Sarah's house had burned down. The silence of my own home felt different. Not empty, never empty, but charged like a quiet workshop before the hammer strikes. The pie they had served still lingered in my mouth, not sweet but sour. I could almost taste the performance, the carefully staged smiles, the way their voices softened whenever they mentioned burdens and rest. They thought I had agreed to think about selling. They thought they'd turn me gently toward their plan, but I knew better. I had nodded yes, smiled even, yet that was not agreement, it was measurement. And now it was time to build my own scaffolding. The next morning I started with the basics, receipts. For years I had kept everything, folders of maintenance records, binders of tax bills, stacks of invoices from plumbers, roofers, landscapers. Some men keep scrapbooks of vacations. I had ledgers of every repair made on this house since the day Ellen and I bought it. I spread them out across the dining room table until the paper nearly covered the wood. Dates, signatures, amounts, all proof that this place wasn't a neglected relic but a living, breathing home I had cared for with my own hands and wallet. As I sorted, I imagined their voices. "He's too old. He can't manage anymore." These papers would say otherwise. By noon I had filled a large accordion folder with the strongest documents. The folder was heavy, but when I held it under my arm I felt lighter, like armor strapped across my chest. I called Marcus's office and left a message. "I have materials ready for review. Let me know when to bring them by." Then I did something I hadn't in a long while. I walked through every room of the house, slowly, deliberately. Not just looking, but seeing. The oak banister Ellen polished until it gleamed. The window seat where Sarah had read books as a teenager. The patched corner in the living room ceiling, proof of the storm I'd beaten back with tarps and long nights of climbing ladders. This house wasn't just property, it was testimony. That evening my phone buzzed again, the group chat. "Daniel, realtor says Thursday works, we'll confirm the time." "Sarah, Dad seemed open, let's keep the momentum." "Son-in-law, play it calm, he'll fold easier that way." Fold, like I was a hand of cards ready to be thrown aside. I screenshotted everything, slid the images into a folder marked Evidence Week 2. Each click of the mouse was a hammer strike on the frame of the case I was building. But paperwork alone wasn't enough. I needed something more. Proof not just of their intentions but of my strength. So I called Derek, my neighbor, a retired firefighter with a knack for detail. He'd been around long enough to know when something wasn't right, and more importantly, he was someone whose word carried weight. "Derek," I said when he picked up, "would you mind stopping by tomorrow? I want to show you something, get your opinion." He agreed without hesitation. That was the thing about true neighbors, they don't need explanations. The next morning I walked him through the house, showed him the improvements, the upkeep, the working furnace, the fresh paint on the porch railings. When we finished, he crossed his arms. "Fred, this place looks better than half the houses on the block. You've kept it in shape. Anyone says otherwise, they're blind." I nodded, grateful. "Would you be willing to say that if it ever came to it?" He looked me straight in the eye. "You know I would." I added his name to my growing list of witnesses. That afternoon I sat again at the dining table, documents neatly stacked, Derek's promise echoing in my head. I thought about strategy, not just defense but offense. If they wanted to frame me as incapable, I would frame myself as prepared. If they wanted to show I was a burden, I would show I was still the builder. The outline began forming in my notebook. Documentation secured, witnesses lined up, legal protections in motion. One final step, an action that would prove without doubt that I was not the man they thought could be pushed aside. As night fell, I returned to the group chat one more time. Another message had appeared. "We'll handle the signatures when the time comes. He won't fight it." I stared at those words, then closed the screen. Because they were wrong, I would fight it. Quietly for now, but with precision, like a builder marking every line before the saw cuts. And when the blade finally came down, they would see the shape of something they hadn't expected. A father who wasn't finished yet. The appointment was set for Thursday afternoon, 3 o'clock sharp. They hadn't asked me if I was free, they had simply told me. The message had come through the group chat like a summons, polite in tone, absolute in intention. I drove myself there anyway, not because I intended to sign anything, not because I wanted to make things easy for them, but because sometimes the strongest move you can make is to show up. The office was in one of those new commercial strips, glass storefronts, brushed steel handles, and potted plants that looked suspiciously plastic. The kind of place built for quick deals, not lasting memories. I walked in carrying my folder of documents beneath my arm, the same way I used to carry blueprints into City Hall when negotiating permits. Inside, my children were already waiting. Sarah smiled too brightly. Daniel stood, adjusting his tie as though he were the one selling the house. Their spouses hovered close like shadows, and at the far end of the conference table sat a woman in a blazer, papers fanned neatly in front of her. The realtor. "Dad," Sarah said warmly, "thanks for coming." I nodded but didn't sit right away. Instead, I let my eyes scan the table. There were contracts already prepared, highlighted sections, sticky notes marking where signatures would go. They had set the stage carefully, just as I'd expected. The realtor launched into her practiced introduction. "Mr. Collins, it's a pleasure. Your children have spoken highly of you. This property is quite valuable and the market is ideal right now. If we list today, I'm confident." I raised my hand. "Stop there." The room went still. Sarah's smile faltered. Daniel cleared his throat. I lowered my folder onto the table with deliberate weight. "Before we discuss anything, we need to be clear. I haven't agreed to sell." For a moment, silence. Then Sarah leaned forward, her voice soft, almost maternal. "Dad, we're just trying to help. It's too much house for one person. You deserve ease, comfort." "Comfort doesn't come from giving away the life I built," I said. Daniel tried another angle. "Think practically. The taxes, the upkeep, the risk of accidents." I opened the folder, sliding out receipts. Maintenance logs, fresh inspection reports I had requested just days earlier. I spread them across the table like cards in a winning hand. "Upkeep," I said calmly. "The roof was redone last spring. Furnace serviced in September. Taxes paid in full. I've managed every detail and I can prove it." The realtor shifted in her chair, glancing at the papers. Professional respect flickered in her eyes. Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's not the point. You can't do this alone forever." "I've done it long enough to know I can handle it now," I replied. "And when I can't, that will be my decision, not yours." The air thickened. Their rehearsed lines had met resistance they hadn't anticipated. For the first time in weeks, I saw uncertainty cross Sarah's face, but she recovered quickly. "We're only thinking about your future. What happens when?" I cut her off gently. "What happens when I need help? Then I'll ask. Until then, the house stays." The realtor cleared her throat, clearly uncomfortable. Perhaps we should reschedule, give everyone time to reflect. Daniel leaned toward her, voice sharp. No, he just needs to sign. It's the right move. I looked at him, really looked. My son, who once begged me to help him build a tree house, who cried when the hammer slipped and split his thumb, now pressing me with the same insistence, but not for nails or wood, for my home. I won't be signing anything today, I said. I gathered the documents back into my folder, each paper sliding neatly into place, the sound crisp in the tense room. Sarah tried one last push, her voice trembling slightly. Dad, if you don't, we'll have no choice but to. She stopped herself, but I heard the unspoken words, force you. I stood slowly, folder under my arm. Then you'll have to live with that choice, but I promise you it won't be easy. The realtor rose as well, extending her hand. Her eyes met mine with something like sympathy. Mr. Collins, thank you for your time. I shook her hand firmly. Don't thank me yet. This isn't over. I walked out into the bright afternoon sun, air sharp against my face. Behind me, muffled voices argued, their tones frantic, disjointed. On the sidewalk, I paused, watching cars crawl past in the heat of rush hour. To anyone else, I probably looked like an old man leaving a meeting. But inside, I felt something stir. A spark. They thought they had cornered me. Instead, they had revealed themselves. Shown me their tactics, their impatience, their willingness to push me toward the edge. And just like in construction, once you see the weak points in a structure, you know exactly where to reinforce and exactly where to strike. The house was quiet when I returned from the realtor's office. Too quiet. Even the old grandfather clock in the hallway seemed reluctant to tick. I set my folder down on the kitchen table and poured myself a glass of water, though it did little to wash down the bitterness of what had just unfolded. For a moment, I simply stood there listening. Silence can tell you a lot. It can tell you if a house is neglected or if it's alive. That evening, my home felt alive, but restless, like it was waiting for something. The phone rang just as I lowered myself into my chair. Sarah's name flashed across the screen. I didn't answer. Minutes later, Daniel called. Then both of them tried again, messages pouring in afterward. We need to talk now. This isn't safe for you. Dad, you're making things harder. Harder for whom, I wondered. The next day they came in person. I was in the backyard raking leaves when I heard the gate creak. Sarah entered first, Daniel close behind. Their spouses lingered near the fence, arms crossed like reluctant soldiers in someone else's war. Dad, Sarah began, her voice already strained, we can't ignore this anymore. I leaned on the rake. Ignore what? Daniel's jaw was tight. Your behavior, it's concerning. You're resistant to reason, you're hoarding documents, you're shutting us out. It's not healthy. Healthy. A word tossed around by people who want to make you doubt yourself. I let them talk. It poured out of them like water breaking through a dam. They spoke of safety, of responsibility, of how difficult it would be if I fell ill in this house. They painted pictures of lonely winters, of medical bills, of accidents waiting to happen. But beneath the words, I heard what they weren't saying. You're in the way. You're delaying our plans. You're holding on to something we already counted as ours. Finally, I asked, do you think I'm unfit? Sarah's eyes flickered. Daniel glanced down. Silence answered for them. That was the breaking point, not their words, but their refusal to say them out loud. The quiet betrayal of children too cowardly to speak plainly. I straightened, gripping the rake like a staff. I've managed this house longer than you've been alive. I paid for it, cared for it, built a life here, and now you question whether I can walk its halls. Daniel stepped forward, his voice sharp. Dad, no one is questioning your past, but the future is still mine to decide. I cut in. The air between us thickened, the kind of heaviness that precedes a storm. Later that night, alone again, I sat at my desk and wrote everything down. The visit, their words, the way they looked at me as if measuring how close I was to collapse. Each detail went into my growing file. Evidence not just of property theft, but of character assassination. I thought of Ellen, of her steady hand on mine during arguments years ago. She would have urged compassion, but even Ellen had her limits. I remembered her once telling Sarah when she was 16 and manipulative, don't mistake kindness for permission. That line returned to me now like a lifeline. The following morning I called Marcus. "They're escalating," I said. "Escalation is good," he replied calmly. "It reveals intent. Document it all." I told him about the backyard confrontation. He asked if any neighbors had seen. I recalled Mrs. Henderson across the street pausing on her porch as Sarah's voice rose. "Yes," I said slowly, "she saw." "Good," Marcus said. "Witnesses matter." We set a meeting for the end of the week. He would begin drafting protections that would go beyond mere paperwork. Meanwhile, the group chat grew more insistent. "If he won't listen, we'll have to file something. We can't let him endanger himself. It's for his own good." Those last 5 words hit me hardest. I'd heard them before, when Sarah was little and Daniel tried to take her toy, insisting it was for her own good. Back then, Ellen and I corrected him. Now, decades later, the game was the same, only the stakes had grown. That evening, as I locked the doors and checked the windows, I realized something. The house wasn't just under siege. I was. Not with weapons, but with words, papers, and polished smiles. The breaking point wasn't about whether I could keep the house. It was about whether I still had the right to be the author of my own life. And I knew then I would not yield. Because once a builder gives up his foundation, everything else crumbles. Marcus's office smelled faintly of leather and coffee when I stepped inside that Friday morning. He was already at his desk, sleeves rolled up, pen in hand. The man had a way of looking at problems like they were just another equation waiting to be solved. "Fred," he said, standing to shake my hand, "you look steadier today." "I am," I told him, "because I'm done playing defense." I laid my folder on his desk, thicker now, stuffed with receipts, inspection reports, notes from neighbors who'd seen my children press me in the yard. Every page felt like a brick in a wall I was building. Marcus flipped through, nodding slowly. "This is good, very good, but we'll need more than proof of upkeep. We need to change the frame of the picture entirely." He explained the plan in simple terms, though the weight of it was anything but simple. I would transfer the house into a living trust. Still mine, still under my control, but legally fortified. Any attempt to claim I was unfit would run headlong into protections that couldn't be brushed aside by signatures or pressure. "And there's one more thing," Marcus added, leaning back in his chair. "We don't have to just protect the property. We can redirect it. You could name beneficiaries outside of your immediate family. An organization, a cause, something that speaks louder than their entitlement." The suggestion hung in the air like a loaded tool belt. Heavy, full of possibility. That night I sat in my study staring at Ellen's photograph. Her smile was warm, timeless, caught in a shaft of sunlight at the lake. "Would you hate me for this?" I asked aloud. "For building walls even our children can't climb?" Of course, she didn't answer. But in the quiet, I remembered a story she once told. About her grandmother, who'd left a small but cherished orchard not to the family that bickered over it, but to the church that had cared for her in her last years. Ellen had admired that choice. She knew who truly valued it, she'd said. The thought settled me. Maybe love wasn't always about handing down possessions. Maybe sometimes love meant drawing a line so the story didn't repeat. So manipulation ended with me, not with whatever grandchildren might come after. The next day, Marcus prepared the papers. "Once signed, the house belongs to the trust," he explained. "You remain trustee, full authority. But it can't be sold, gifted, or transferred without your decision. Not theirs." I read every line. My hands shook, not from doubt, but from the gravity of the choice. Then I signed. With that pen stroke, something shifted inside me. For weeks I had felt like prey, cornered and measured. But now the ground had moved. Quietly, invisibly, the house was out of their reach. I didn't tell them, not yet. Instead, I let the charade continue. Sunday dinner came, and I sat at Sarah's table again. Roast chicken this time, potatoes crisped just so. The same choreography unfolded. Smiles too polished, voices too gentle, questions veiled as concern. Daniel leaned in halfway through the meal. "Dad, we've arranged another showing with the realtor. Just preliminary, you don't even need to come." I sipped my water, hiding the smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "All right," I said simply. Their relief was immediate, visible. They thought the door was opening wider. They had no idea it was already sealed shut behind steel. The twist, of course, was not just legal but emotional, because as they whispered plans into their phones, I was writing letters. One to the local veterans housing nonprofit, an organization I'd supported quietly for years. Another to the church Ellen loved, where her name still graced the plaque on the garden wall. I wasn't transferring ownership yet. That step could come later if it needed to. But I was making clear to myself that family didn't have to mean blood. Family could mean legacy, memory, dignity. And if the day ever came when my children tried to drag me into court, I wanted them to see it plainly. Every act of greed they made only pushed me closer to leaving everything somewhere they could never touch. That night, as I filed the trust papers into the lockbox beneath my bed, I realized something remarkable. For the first time since Ellen's death, I wasn't simply reacting to loss. I was building again, not with wood or nails, but with decisions, with resolve. The children believed they were driving the story forward. They thought they held the pen, but I had reclaimed the role of author. The breaking point was behind me. The twist was here. The house was no longer theirs to covet, and they didn't even know it. And when the moment came to reveal it, the look on their faces would be something I'd waited my whole life to see. By the following week, their tone had shifted. The group chat no longer dripped with patience or soft persuasion. Instead, the words grew sharper, the pauses shorter. Sarah, we can't let him drag this out. Daniel, he'll thank us later. Son-in-law, then let's push harder. Push harder, that was the phrase. It sat on the screen like a threat dressed in casual clothes. I didn't reply. I never did. My silence had become its own strategy. Each unread bubble of text was a reminder that I was watching, recording, gathering. They thought silence meant surrender. They didn't realize silence could also mean preparation. The first real escalation came on a Wednesday evening. I had just returned from the grocery store, arms heavy with bags, when I found Daniel's car already in the driveway. He was sitting on the porch steps, his elbows resting on his knees like a man waiting to deliver bad news. Dad, he said as I approached, we need to talk. I set the bags inside before answering. About what? He followed me in, his voice clipped. About you, about your ability to manage things here. We're worried. The word again, worried, as though concern could excuse control. I set the milk in the fridge, bread on the counter, moving slowly, deliberately. Everything is fine here. Daniel shook his head. It doesn't look fine from where we're standing. You won't cooperate with us. You're refusing to make reasonable decisions, and honestly, it's making people wonder. He stopped himself, but I could finish the sentence, making people wonder if you're competent. I turned then, meeting his eyes. I've built homes bigger than this one, managed payrolls, contracts, entire crews, and you question whether I can manage my own kitchen. He faltered, but only for a moment. This isn't the same, Dad. You're older now. Things change. I walked to my study and pulled out the folder I had shown Marcus. Spreading the documents on the desk, I gestured toward them. Upkeep records, paid bills, fresh inspections. Do these look like the papers of a man slipping away? Daniel's eyes flickered just for an instant. Proof doesn't always silence people, but it unsettles them. He gathered himself quickly. This isn't about paperwork, it's about you being alone here, about your safety. Safety, I said slowly. Or convenience. The silence between us told me which answer was true. That night Sarah called. Her voice was sharp, brittle. Dad, Daniel says you got defensive. This is exactly what we mean. You're not thinking clearly anymore. I let her speak, let her words pile higher and higher. Each accusation became another stone I placed into my invisible foundation. When she paused, I only said, I hear you. Because sometimes the best way to win an argument is not to fight it at all. 2 days later, they returned as a group, all 4 of them. They came in the evening, unannounced, filing into my living room with smiles too wide. Sarah began with practiced sweetness. Dad, we've been talking. We think it's time to bring in someone professional just for an evaluation to make sure you're doing okay. The word landed like a cold nail, evaluation. Daniel added quickly, it's standard. Doctors recommend it for people your age. It doesn't mean anything bad, just reassurance. I knew what it meant. It meant documentation. If they couldn't get me to sign, they would try to brand me incapable. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands. You want me tested, judged by a stranger who doesn't know me. It's just precaution, Sarah insisted. And if I refuse, I asked. Their silence again was answer enough. After they left, the house felt heavy with their absence. I walked room to room, touching the familiar walls, the photographs, the worn wood Ellen once polished. They wanted to turn all this into evidence against me, but I wasn't powerless. In the study, I opened Marcus's file. There, among the notes, was a section on guardianship cases, how they were argued, how they were defended. If they tried to prove I was unfit, I would be ready. Not only with papers, but with witnesses, with neighbors, with proof of every task I performed daily. And beneath all of it, the trust deed now securely filed with the county. The irony was almost sweet. Even if they succeeded in their evaluation, even if they tried to remove me, the house they wanted was already untouchable. Lying in bed that night, I replayed Daniel's words. Things change. Yes, they do. Children grow into adults. Parents grow older, roles shift. But the part they didn't understand was this: change doesn't erase choice. Age doesn't erase authority. They had escalated, pressing harder, circling closer. What they didn't see was that every step forward they took only brought them deeper into a maze I had already mapped. And soon, they would find out the difference between pressing harder and pushing too far. It happened on a Saturday morning. I was halfway through fixing a loose hinge on the pantry door when the knock came. Firm, official, not the knock of family or neighbors, but of someone carrying authority they hadn't earned. When I opened the door, Sarah stood there, a strained smile stretched across her face. Beside her was a woman in a gray blazer, clipboard in hand. Behind them, Daniel lingered near the car, arms crossed, pretending to be casual. "Dad," Sarah said sweetly, "this is Dr. Mayers. She's just here to check in, talk a little, make sure everything's good." The word again, check, as if I were a light bulb, a fuse, something to be inspected and replaced if faulty. I leaned against the door frame. "I didn't ask for this." Dr. Mayers gave a professional nod. "It's very simple, Mr. Collins. A short conversation, standard questions, no pressure." But pressure was exactly the point. I could feel it radiating from Sarah's expectant eyes, from Daniel's posture by the car. This wasn't kindness, this was positioning. "Maybe another time," I said flatly, beginning to close the door. Sarah's hand shot out, gentle but firm. "Dad, please, it's just a talk." I met her gaze, steady. "And if I say no?" Her silence told me everything. I let the door swing wider, just enough to make them believe they were winning. "All right," I said. "Come in." Inside, I led them to the living room. The sun streamed through the tall windows, catching the dust motes in golden light. Ellen's photograph watched from the mantel, her smile calm as ever. Dr. Mayer sat on the sofa, flipping a page on her clipboard. "Do you know what day it is today?" I smiled faintly. "Saturday, the day I fixed the pantry hinge." She jotted something down. "And the year?" "2025, I answered. "The year my children forgot who raised them." Her pen paused in midair. The questions came steadily after that. Memory tests, simple math, descriptions of daily routines. I answered each one clearly, deliberately, even adding detail she hadn't requested, like the fact that I balanced my checkbook every Thursday evening, or that the furnace filter had been changed 3 weeks ago. Sarah sat stiffly, her hands folded too tightly in her lap. She had expected faltering, confusion, gaps in my story. Instead, she watched me demonstrate not decline but competence. Finally, Dr. Mayers closed her folder. "Mr. Collins, you seem perfectly capable. Fact, more organized than many I've seen." Sarah's smile cracked. "But maybe you should check again, just to be sure." The doctor shook her head gently. "There's no indication of impairment here. If concerns persist, a medical evaluation would be required, but from what I've seen, he's managing just fine." When they left, Sarah avoided my eyes. Daniel didn't speak at all. The car door slammed harder than it needed to. I stood at the window, watching them drive away. My heart beat steady, not from relief but from resolve. They had tried to bring in authority, and authority had spoken on my side. Still, I knew better than to think they were finished. Escalation never ends in retreat. It only shifts forms. That evening I called Marcus. They brought a doctor, I told him. He didn't sound surprised. And how did it go? Well enough, I said, but I don't think they'll stop. They won't, Marcus agreed, which is why we push forward now. Not just defense, offense. We secure your rights in ways that make it impossible for them to continue without exposing themselves. I looked at the lockbox beneath my desk where the trust documents rested. The house was already safe, but Marcus was right. This wasn't only about property anymore. It was about dignity, about whether I would be treated as a man or as a placeholder waiting to be replaced. That night, I took out Ellen's photograph and set it on the table beside me. They think they're saving me, I whispered, but what they're really doing is proving me right. The photo caught the lamplight, her eyes shining as if amused by my stubbornness. I felt her presence not as sorrow but as strength, steadying my hand as it had so many times before. The attempted evaluation had backfired, but I knew the storm wasn't over. If anything, this was only the gathering of darker clouds, and I was ready. Because a builder knows, once the foundation is solid, you don't fear the storm. You let it test the strength of your work. The Monday after the evaluation, the group chat went quiet. No plans, no persuasion, no cheerful emojis masking hard intentions. Silence this time didn't mean peace. It meant recalculation. I had lived long enough to recognize the lull before a second attempt. In construction, you learn this rhythm too. First, the inspector walks through, points out issues, makes you believe you've failed. Then comes the pause when you brace for the report. After that, the real test begins. I decided not to wait. That morning I walked to the kitchen, poured coffee into my old chipped mug, and opened the lockbox beneath my desk. Inside lay the trust documents, proof that the house was no longer theirs to reach. But Marcus had been right. Protection was only one side of the wall. Offense mattered too. So I began gathering not just evidence of their pressure, but reminders of their dependence on me. Checks I'd written for Sarah's graduate tuition. Receipts for Daniel's first car, purchased in cash when his job couldn't cover the down payment. Bank transfers for countless emergencies that had never really been emergencies at all. I photocopied everything, labeled each page, stacked them neatly. When I looked at the growing pile, I didn't feel anger so much as clarity. They thought I had forgotten. They thought my silence meant I had surrendered. But every sacrifice was documented, every act of generosity now transformed into leverage. 2 days later, they called a family meeting. Sarah hosted again, this time with no candles, no roast chicken, no effort to dress it as celebration. The dining table was bare except for a pitcher of water and a stack of papers in the center. Daniel gestured for me to sit. "Dad, we've been patient. We've tried, but this isn't sustainable." Sarah folded her hands. "We want to be honest. You're not managing well. You need to let go of the house before something worse happens." I looked at the papers, draft agreements, realtor contracts, documents they assumed I would eventually sign under pressure. Instead of reaching for them, I opened my own folder. The room stilled as I spread out copies of checks, receipts, and transfers, decades of proof laid bare under the dim chandelier. "These," I said quietly, "are records of every time I helped you. Your degrees, your weddings, your mortgages. Dozens of times you came to me as a father and I said yes." Their faces paled. Sarah opened her mouth but found no words. "And now," I continued, "you claim I can't manage my own affairs, that I'm incapable of keeping the very house I worked for while supporting all of you." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "That's not, Dad, that's not what we mean." "Then what do you mean?" My voice was calm, but the weight behind it made the room colder. Silence stretched. Even the children playing upstairs seemed to quiet, as if the house itself demanded stillness. Finally, Sarah whispered, "We just thought it would be easier." "Easier for whom?" I asked. No one answered. I gathered the documents back into my folder, each page sliding into place with the precision of a craftsman finishing a cut. Then I leaned back, folding my hands. "You see, I'm not here to argue. I'm here to inform you, this house is no longer in my name alone. It's protected, bound in ways you cannot touch. Whatever schemes you've whispered about are already too late. Their shock was almost audible, a sharp intake of breath shared around the table. Daniel's voice cracked first. "What did you do?" "What I had to," I said. "What any man would do when the people closest to him confuse love with possession." Sarah's eyes brimmed, though I couldn't tell if it was guilt or anger. "You went behind our backs." "No," I replied softly. "You went behind mine." The room felt smaller then, the air tight with truths too long buried. For the first time in months, I wasn't the one on trial. They were, and they knew it. When I left their house that evening, the sky was bruised with twilight. Street lamps flickered on one by one, casting long shadows across the pavement. I walked slowly to my truck, folder under my arm, my heart steady. They had escalated, but I had turned the tide. The balance of power was shifting, not with shouting or threats, but with simple, undeniable fact. And as I drove home, I realized something Ellen used to say echoed truer than ever. The person who controls the story controls the ending. For weeks, they had been rioting me as weak, incapable, irrelevant. But I had reclaimed the pen. The next chapter would not be theirs to dictate. It would be mine. The silence that followed my revelation did not last long. By the next evening, the calls began again. First Sarah, then Daniel. When I didn't answer, the messages arrived in quick succession, angry and pleading in equal measure. "Dad, you blindsided us. How could you trust a lawyer over your own family? If you keep this up, we'll have no choice." No choice. That phrase pulsed on the screen like a warning siren. I set the phone down on the counter and let the house absorb the noise. For decades, these walls had heard laughter, arguments, bedtime stories. Tonight they heard the fracture of blood ties. The next Sunday they came together again. No dinner this time, no attempt at warmth. Just my children standing in my living room, faces tight as fists. Sarah spoke first, her voice sharp with accusation. "You had no right to do this. That house, it's supposed to stay in the family." I stayed seated steady. "It is in the family, I'm still here." Daniel stepped forward. "Don't play word games, Dad. You locked us out. You made us look like fools." I lifted my folder, placed it on the coffee table without opening it. "No, you made yourselves look like fools. I just kept records." The words hung between us. Sarah's cheeks flushed. Daniel clenched his jaw. Then Sarah said it, the ultimatum I had been waiting for. "If you don't undo this, if you don't put the house back, then we'll go to court. We'll file for guardianship. We'll tell them you're not capable anymore." The room seemed to contract, the air pulled tight around us. I looked at her, my own daughter, and saw not the child who once clung to my hand crossing the street, but a stranger ready to brand me incompetent for the sake of a deed. "And when you do," I said evenly, "I'll show them this folder. Every bill, every receipt, every act of care. I'll show them how I've managed not just this house, but your lives when you needed me most." Sarah's eyes flickered, but she pressed on. "It won't matter. Judges listen to families. If we say you're unfit, then you'll be lying," I interrupted. Daniel's voice cracked in. "We're not lying, we're protecting you. Can't you see that?" I stood now, slow and deliberate, so they could see the steadiness in my movements, hear the strength in my voice. "Protecting me would mean respecting me. You don't protect a man by stripping him of his dignity. You don't protect a father by plotting his removal." Silence was different this time. Not the silence of calculation, but of impact. They hadn't expected defiance so clear, so calm, but Sarah recovered first. "Fine," she said, her tone cold. "If you won't listen, then we'll do what we have to. Don't blame us when the system takes your side away." She turned, Daniel following, their spouses trailing behind like shadows. The front door closed harder than necessary, rattling the frame. I stood alone in the living room, the echo still vibrating through the floorboards. Later that night, I walked through the house again, each room bathed in the dim glow of lamplight. The study smelled faintly of old paper. The kitchen carried the scent of coffee grounds. Upstairs, the bedroom was quiet, Ellen's picture smiling from the dresser. I realized then what their ultimatum truly meant. It wasn't about guardianship or court filings. It was about control. They couldn't stand the idea that I had written a story without them, that I had chosen boundaries over blind trust. But I also knew something else. If they pushed me to court, the truth would surface. And truth, once spoken aloud, has a way of reshaping even the most stubborn narratives. The next morning I called Marcus. "They've threatened court," I told him. He was silent for a moment, then said, "Good. That means they're desperate. Desperation always exposes weakness." I asked, "What do I do now?" "You hold steady," he replied. "And you prepare for their next move, because it will come, Fred. It always does." I hung up, staring at the lockbox once more. Inside it lay my protections, but inside me lay something stronger, resolve tempered by years of building, loss, and endurance. The ultimatum had been spoken. The line had been drawn. And though the road ahead promised storm, I felt no fear. Because when a structure has been tested, when its foundation holds, no amount of wind can tear it down. I was not the man they thought could be swayed. I was not the father they believed would fold. And soon they would learn that every ultimatum carries two edges, the one you threaten and the one that cuts you when your bluff is called. It was a Tuesday morning when the envelope came. Plain white, thin, almost unimpressive. The kind of mail you might toss into a pile without a second thought. But when I saw the return address, County Court, I knew. I sat at the kitchen table, the light spilling across the wood in slanted beams, and slit the envelope open with the same steady care I once used to plane a stubborn piece of oak. Inside were the papers, a petition for guardianship. My own children, sworn affidavits attached, claiming I was no longer capable of managing personal and financial affairs. The words blurred for a moment, not from poor eyesight but from the weight pressing against my chest. So this was it. The ultimatum had turned real. I read every line slowly, deliberately. The petition painted me as confused, forgetful, unsafe in my own home. Sarah had written about missed bill payments, though every bill lay paid and filed neatly in my study. Daniel claimed I was isolated, though the neighbors could testify to my daily walks, my conversations across fences, my steady presence in the community. Lie after lie, wrapped in the language of concern. They had taken the story and twisted it, hoping the court would see a caricature of decline instead of the man still sitting at this table, reading every word with clarity. That afternoon I drove to Marcus's office, the papers folded in my pocket. He looked them over, nodding as if he'd expected this all along. "They've played their hand," he said. "Now we play ours." "What happens next?" I asked. He outlined the process, a hearing scheduled in 3 weeks, evidence presented, witnesses called, a judge deciding whether I was to remain in control of my own life or hand it over to the very children who sought to erase me. 3 weeks, I repeated, letting the number settle in my bones. Marcus leaned forward. "Fred, we have everything we need, documents, testimony, proof of your competence. But remember, this isn't just a legal battle, it's emotional. Judges are human. They'll weigh not only facts but impressions." I nodded. I understood. I had spent my life building more than houses. I had built a reputation, and now that reputation would be my strongest wall. When I returned home, the house felt different. Not weaker, but alert, like it knew it had been named in the attack. I walked through each room, hand brushing over furniture, photos, the small imperfections of walls patched by my own hands. This wasn't just property under threat. This was memory, labor, love, everything Ellen and I had poured into brick and beam. And now it was evidence. The days that followed were a blur of preparation. I gathered witnesses, Derek, my neighbor, who agreed without hesitation to testify about my upkeep of the house, Mrs. Henderson across the street, who had seen Sarah and Daniel arguing in my yard, pressing me with words too sharp to be called care. Even the postman, who could confirm my regular conversations and steady routines. I organized receipts into binders, each page labeled with date and purpose. I even filmed myself performing daily tasks, changing a light bulb, balancing the checkbook, cooking a meal. Not vanity, not performance, just proof. Every act became a declaration: I am still here. The children stayed silent during those weeks. No calls, no visits, no texts. Their silence was not absence but strategy, letting the court speak for them. At night, lying in bed, I felt the ache of it, not the legal battle that I could prepare for, but the personal one. How had we come to this? How had love become litigation? I looked at Ellen's photograph on the dresser. She would have grieved this fracture, but she would have told me to stand. "You don't hand over the life you built, Fred," I could almost hear her say. "Not even to those you love if they mean to take it by force." Her imagined voice steadied me. 3 weeks later, the court date arrived in black print across the notice Marcus delivered. Friday, 9 a.m. I folded the notice, slid it into my pocket, and walked outside. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of leaves and wood smoke. Across the street, Mrs. Henderson waved, her small dog tugging at the leash. Derek called from his porch, reminding me of the football game that weekend. Life went on, and that, I realized, was my strongest defense. Because decline doesn't look like this: neighbors relying on you, friendships intact, routine steady. Decline hides. I was not hiding. I was standing in plain sight. That evening I sat at my desk and wrote a letter. Not to the court, not to Marcus, not even to my children. A letter to myself. You are not weak. You are not diminished. They mistook patience for surrender, but you are still the builder. And builders don't collapse when storms come. They brace, they reinforce, they outlast. I folded the letter and placed it into the lockbox alongside the trust papers. One more piece of evidence, one more reminder. The papers had arrived. The court was waiting. The battle had shifted from whispers and signatures to the open light of judgment. And for the first time, I welcomed it. Because nothing reveals truth like a room where lies must be spoken aloud under oath. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and old paper, the kind of scent that clung to places where judgment was passed day after day. I had been here before, years ago, settling property disputes for my company. Back then, it was always business, contracts, blueprints, numbers. Now it was my life on the docket. I walked in with Marcus at my side. His stride was calm, steady, as though we were about to present a simple business plan. He had reminded me, facts win cases, Fred. Emotion seals them. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than I remembered. No grand ceilings or echoing chambers, just wood benches, a high desk where the judge sat, and the heavy hush of expectation. Sarah and Daniel were already there. They looked polished, rehearsed. Sarah wore a navy blazer too stiff for her, Daniel a tie that still carried its price tag crease. They didn't look at me as I entered, or perhaps they couldn't. The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a precise knot, called the session to order. Her eyes scanned the room, sharp, unyielding. Marcus began by presenting our evidence, binders stacked neatly on the desk, each tab labeled, receipts, bank statements, photographs of my home repairs. He called Derek to the stand, who testified with the blunt honesty of a man unused to performance. "I see him out there every day," Derek said. "Mowing, fixing, even helping me with my gutters last month. If that's decline, I hope I decline the same way." A ripple of quiet laughter broke the courtroom stiffness. Even the judge allowed a flicker of amusement before noting it down. Next came Mrs. Henderson. She was nervous, clutching her purse like a shield, but her voice carried conviction. "I've lived across the street for 20 years. Fred steady as ever. The only confusion I've seen came from those two pressuring him." She nodded towards Sarah and Daniel. "And I've seen plenty of that." Their attorney objected, but the judge let her continue. When it was my turn, I rose slowly, knees reminding me of the years but not of weakness. I swore the oath, sat down, and spoke plainly. "I built my life the way I built houses," I began. "One brick at a time, steady, honest, lasting. My wife and I raised our children with that same care. Since she passed, I've done my best to carry both our shares of love. If that wasn't enough, I can accept their disappointment. But I cannot accept lies about my mind." I looked at the judge, not at Sarah and Daniel. "I manage my bills, I care for my home, I walk with my neighbors, I read, I cook, I live. If growing older means being declared incapable, then we have all lost." Silence followed, a silence that felt heavier than applause. Then it was their turn. Sarah took the stand, her voice trembling just enough to sound sincere. She spoke of my forgetfulness, of the time I repeated a story at Thanksgiving, of the one evening I misplaced my car keys. Daniel followed, reciting a list of supposed neglect: a lawn unmowed, a light left unreplaced, a refrigerator empty one weekend. Each detail carried a grain of truth but lacked the whole picture. Their attorney wove it into a narrative: a declining father, a risk to himself, a burden they sought to relieve. For a moment I feared the judge might nod along, but then Marcus rose. "Your Honor," he said, "confusion at times, misplaced keys, repeated stories, these describe every one of us in this room. To strip a man of his life on those grounds is not protection, it is theft by another name." The words hung in the air like a hammer striking steel. The climax came not from testimony but from a slip. Under cross-examination, Sarah admitted they had already discussed plans for my house. She tried to catch herself, but the words were out. "We thought it would be better used if sold." Better used. The judge's pen paused mid-sentence. She leaned forward. "Sold," before any determination of guardianship was made. Sarah flushed. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Their attorney stammered, but the damage was done. In that single phrase the veil dropped. Concern had become calculation. Love had become ledger lines. The judge called a recess. I sat back, breathing deeply, the pounding in my chest slowing as Marcus whispered, "That was their crack, Fred. You don't patch cracks in court, they spread." When the judge returned, her voice was firm, almost weary. "I have heard both sides. Aging is not incompetence. Memory lapses are not incapacity. This petition is denied." The gavel struck, a sound like a door slamming shut on their scheme. Sarah gasped. Daniel muttered something under his breath, but the judge continued. "Furthermore, I caution the petitioners. Families should not use this court to settle grievances rooted in property or inheritance. This chamber protects the vulnerable, not the greedy." Her words burned brighter than any victory speech. I walked out of that courthouse lighter than I had in years. Outside, the autumn sun was warm, the air crisp with fallen leaves. Sarah and Daniel rushed past me, eyes avoiding mine, voices hushed in argument. I didn't follow. Marcus clapped my shoulder. "You stood. You'll remember this day." I nodded, not in triumph but in quiet relief. The battle wasn't just about ownership. It was about reclaiming my voice. And I had spoken. As I reached my truck, I paused, looking back at the courthouse. One thought settled in me with clarity. Justice, like construction, takes time. But when the foundation is true, it stands. The courthouse steps were wide and sunlit, a place where truth seemed to hang in the air just a little longer before drifting off into memory. I descended them slowly, Marcus beside me, his briefcase swinging with calm finality. For a moment, I thought the story might end here, with the gavel, the judgment, the weight lifted. But families don't end at the courthouse door. Sarah and Daniel were waiting by the parking lot, their voices sharp even before I reached them. "You embarrassed us in there," Sarah hissed. Her polished exterior had cracked, revealing something raw beneath. Daniel stood beside her, his jaw tight, his fists curled like a boy caught in a fight he couldn't win. I stopped, letting the distance between us hold its own tension. "You embarrassed yourselves," I said quietly. "The judge only repeated what you revealed." Their faces shifted, anger, then shame, then anger again. That evening I sat at my kitchen table, the court papers folded neatly away, the victory still fresh but uneasy. Victories in courtrooms are clean. Victories in families never are. The phone rang. It was Derek, my neighbor. "Fred, just a heads up. Daniel drove past your house twice tonight, real slow, didn't stop, but it felt off." I thanked him, hung up, and looked out the window. The street was empty, washed in the glow of the lamppost. But I felt it too, the sense that the battle hadn't ended. It had simply shifted ground. The fallout came in whispers first. A few days later, Mrs. Henderson mentioned that Sarah had been telling people at church that I was unstable. At the hardware store, a clerk I'd known for years asked gently if I was doing okay on my own. Word traveled fast in small towns, faster than facts. I realized then, my children had lost in court, but they hadn't surrendered. They were trying to win in the court of public opinion. It stung, not because neighbors doubted me. I had lived long enough to outlast gossip, but because my children carried the knife. Each rumor felt like a betrayal printed in ink too permanent to erase. Marcus called me in for a follow-up. They might try other avenues, he warned. Financial pressure, social pressure, even personal pressure. He paused, weighing his words. You need to be prepared for them showing up again, Fred. Desperate people rarely walk away quietly. That night, I locked the doors with unusual care. Not out of fear, but out of recognition. My children were not acting as children. They were acting as adversaries. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind of day Ellen and I used to spend reading the paper on the porch. I was pruning the rose bushes when Sarah's car pulled up, tires crunching against the gravel. Daniel stepped out first, his shoulders squared, his eyes cold. Sarah followed, holding a folder under her arm. "Dad," she said, not warmly, not even neutrally. "We need to talk." I set down the shears. "About what?" "About how this isn't over," Daniel snapped. "You think one judge can stop us, we'll find another way." Sarah opened the folder, pulling out printed copies of bank statements. "We know you've been moving money. We know about the trust. Do you really think you can keep everything locked away from us forever?" Their words were barbed, but beneath the barbs was something worse. Entitlement dressed as righteousness. I took the folder from Sarah, glanced at the papers, then handed it back. "You've studied numbers, but you haven't studied lessons. Let me teach you one more." I pointed to the house behind me. That roof didn't stand through storms because it was flashy. It stood because its foundation was set right. And my life, Sarah, Daniel, it has a foundation you can't shake. Integrity, work, love, none of which you've shown today. Daniel muttered a curse under his breath. Sarah's eyes glistened, but it wasn't regret, it was frustration, the sting of doors closing. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice trembling. "When you're old and alone, you'll wish you'd given us what we asked." I looked at her, my own daughter, and felt something inside me shift. Not breaking, not bending, settling, like a beam finding its final place in a frame. "No," I said softly. "I'll regret believing that love meant surrender, and that regret ends today." They left without another word, the car tires spitting gravel like punctuation. I stood there long after the sound faded, the roses pruned but my heart still raw. Inside, I poured a glass of water, sat at the table, and wrote down everything they had said. Marcus's advice echoed in my mind: document everything. Yet even as I wrote, I knew the documents weren't just for court. They were for me, for the record of a father who had given, and finally learned that giving without boundary isn't love. It's erasure. That night, sleep came late, but when it did, it was steady. I dreamt of Ellen, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder, her voice clear. "You've stood up, Fred. Don't step back now." I woke with her words still in my ears, the sun streaming through the curtains, and realized the fallout was only beginning. But so was my resolve. The morning after Sarah and Daniel stormed out, the house was still. I walked through each room, the air holding that echo you only notice when something has shifted for good. On the mantel sat Ellen's photograph. Her smile, half amused, half knowing, met mine as though she understood what had been decided before I even put pen to paper. I thought of my children's faces when they realized I had locked the doors they believed would always swing open. Shock, anger, disbelief. And yet beneath all that there had been something else, the faint recognition that their game was over. For years I had confused sacrifice with love, silence with peace, surrender with kindness. I had been patient, endlessly patient, because I thought patience was the last gift I could give them after their mother's passing. But patience had turned into weakness, and weakness had invited their greed. That era ended yesterday. I called Marcus again that morning. Together we finalized the last safeguards, the trust, the living will, the charitable clauses. Nothing extravagant, nothing designed to wound, only protections. My children could not touch what they had already tried to take. After signing the last document, Marcus looked at me across the polished desk. "How do you feel?" I considered the question. For years, my answer would have been weary, guarded, even afraid, but now I surprised myself. Lighter, I said, back home. I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the windows wide. Fresh autumn air swept in, carrying the smell of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. For the first time, the house didn't feel like a fortress braced against attack. It felt like a home again. Later that evening, I invited Derek and Mrs. Henderson over for coffee. We sat in the living room and I told them plainly, if you hear rumors, if you hear my children try to spin a story, just know the truth is simple. I'm fine, I'm capable, and I'm done being used. Derek clapped my shoulder. Mrs. Henderson nodded, eyes kind. Support comes in unexpected forms and often from those we're not bound to by blood. On Sunday, I drove to the lake cabin. The road wound through trees painted in gold and rust, and the water shimmered like glass when I arrived. I carried Ellen's photograph out onto the porch, set it on the small table, and poured myself a cup of coffee. The silence was rich, not empty. You'd have told me to draw the line, I said softly. I finally did. I sat there for hours, watching the sun dip low, the lake changing color with every passing minute. It struck me that boundaries, like shorelines, were not signs of weakness. They were the very things that gave shape to beauty. Without them, water would flood and destroy. With them, water reflected the sky. When I returned home, I found another letter from Sarah. The handwriting was quick, the tone defiant. You'll regret this when you're old. When you need us, we won't be there. I folded it once and placed it in the same drawer as the court papers, not out of hurt but out of record. Their words no longer pierced. They were just echoes of a choice they had already made. The final boundary wasn't just legal or financial, it was emotional. It was the decision that I would no longer chase love that came only in the form of demands. And so I began again, slowly, simply. I fixed the squeaky hinge on the back door. I planted bulbs that would bloom come spring. I started walking with Derek in the mornings, his dog bounding ahead while we talked about ordinary things, football, weather, the stubborn economy. Life did not end when my children turned their backs. In many ways it began anew, on steadier terms, on firmer ground. One evening I wrote in my journal, kindness without respect is not love. Love without boundaries is not family, and peace without self-respect is only surrender. Those sentences, I knew, were the truest inheritance I could ever leave. If you followed my story this far, perhaps you felt echoes of your own. Maybe you've known the sting of being overlooked or the pain of realizing patience can be mistaken for weakness. If so, let my story remind you, you are not powerless. You are not too late. Boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They are fences that protect what matters inside. If you felt something in this story, anger, hope, even relief, I'd be grateful if you clicked like to let me know. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more of these true-to-life journeys, and leave a comment if you've ever faced a moment where you had to say no, even to those you love. Thank you for walking with me through this long road. And remember, protecting yourself is not the end of love, it's the beginning of respect.